Welcome. The Subcommittee for Indigenous Peoples of the United States will now come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on investigating the health and safety risks of Native children at BIE boarding schools. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chairman and the ranking minority member. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted to the clerk by 5 p.m. today. I also ask unanimous consent for the Oregon Congressional Representatives Kurt Schrader and Susan Bonamici to join us on the dais to provide questions for the witnesses. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Good morning, and a warm welcome to all of our witnesses, and thank you for traveling here. We're here today to get answers about how we can better protect the health and well-being of Native students attending BIE boarding schools. Let's be clear, our country has a long, horrific history when it comes to Native American children's attendance at boarding schools. For a period over 100 years, federal Indian education policy partially consisted of forcefully abducting Native children from their homes and sending them to far-off, federally funded border schools meant to assimilate and exploit them. It's with keen awareness of this shameful history that we convened this hearing today to get answers about the Chemwa boarding school in Washington State and hear from witnesses about how we can better protect Native students from across the nation. Chemwa Indian School is one of the oldest continually operating boarding schools in the United States. Over many years, its mission shifted from assimilation to prioritization of culturally competent care and curriculum for students and families who see the school as an opportunity to escape difficult home lives or the challenges of attending a school on a reservation. Students at the school originate from as many as 80 tribes, with 1/3 of students hailing from my home state of Arizona. We are here today because of the extremely disturbing signs that Chemwa is not fulfilling its obligation to properly care for the health and well-being of its students. As of June 2018, 4 current and former Chemwa students have died. Though no two of these student stories are identical, the testimony we will hear today reflects disturbing trends at Chemwa, including a lack of sufficient care for students' health and mental health, including outright negligence, ill-advised and harmful disciplinary policies, including a high rate of suspension and expulsion, and school policies discouraging transparency and accountability. I am heartbroken that we need to be here today, and that it has taken so long for some of our witnesses who have lost loved ones to get answers. That ends now. We have a legal and, more importantly, a moral responsibility to keep Native children safe. I want to keep this short so we can honor the stories of the students' families and former staff and others who have traveled a long way to share their words with us. Before I turn it over to my ranking member, I want to extend a special thank you to my colleagues, Representative Schrader and Bonamici, who helped bring this issue to my attention starting last year and who have fought to protect Native students. My hope today is that we begin to get the answers needed to protect Native students against attending all BIE boarding schools, including Chemwa. I would now like to recognize the ranking member, Mr. Cooke, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I know several of you have traveled a long distance to be with us, and there's a number of us that make that cross-country flight every week, and it's no fun. In today's hearing, we will discuss the serious challenges facing schools to provide education in Native American and Alaskan Native students, specifically at one of the 4 off-reservation boarding schools in Salem, Oregon, an Indian school which is operated by the Bureau of Indian Education. In 2017, the Oregon Public Broadcasting released a series reporting on tragic events that many of our witnesses will be discussing. In recent years, Congress has learned a great deal about the disgraceful conditions impacting Native American schools and obviously the education that's with it. The Education and Labor Committee began exploring this crisis and held hearings from 2015 to 2018, which revealed very appalling details. The Government Accounting Office has also released several reports over the last decade documenting the disorganized bureaucracy and poor communications that made it difficult, if not impossible, for these schools to receive the services and support they desperately needed. The purpose of today's hearing should not be about assigning blame to any one person or administration. There's plenty of blame to go around, I guess. My hope is that we can understand the root causes, if we can get there, of these persistent challenges, because it's over and over again from my readings, and focus on fixing the problem and achieving better results. I encourage my colleagues that we don't shift away from the primary focus, which is the education of children that are attending or have attended a Bureau of Indian Education boarding school. Instead, Congress should focus on fixing the problem and aiding the administration in ensuring the schools are safe, fully staffed by qualified individuals who can provide the best education environment for these children. I myself have been an educator, although many of my colleagues can't believe I can read or write, and this subject is very, very sensitive to me because of my background. Many students came to this school for a quality, culturally relevant education in a safe environment. And I know that everyone in this room can agree that this is what we want and what every young student deserves. I am pleased to have a representative from the Department of Interior here today, and I'm looking forward to working with both the administration as well as the committee that has jurisdiction over Indian education. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Cooke. Now I would like to welcome our distinguished witnesses on panel number 1. Our first witness for this panel is Ms. Celeste Carson. Apologize if I say any names inappropriately. A former teacher at the Chemwa Indian School and Anishinaabe woman from the Bay Mills Indian community. Next is Ms. Beatrice Willis, parent of former Chemwa student Marshall Friday, an enrolled member of the Northern Arapaho tribe. Then we have Ms. Teresa Keith, parent of former Chemwa student Melissa Abel, and an Alaska native of the Athabascan, Tlingit, and Haida tribes. And finally, we have Ms. Joy Rennick, former teacher at the Chemwa Indian School and longtime educator. Let me remind the witnesses that under our committee rules, they must limit their oral statements to 5 minutes, but that their entire statement will appear in the hearing record. When you begin, the lights on the witness table will turn green. After 4 minutes, the yellow light will start coming on, and once you hit 5 minutes, please stop. That means the red light has come on. I will also allow the entire panel to testify before members begin questioning the witnesses. The chair now recognizes Ms. Celeste Carson.
My name is Celeste Carson, and I am a member of the Bay Mills Indian community in Brimley, Michigan. I worked as a teacher at Chemawa Indian School for almost 6 years. From the moment I was offered a position at Chemawa, there were red flags that it was not a healthy, functioning school. On the first day of school, I was still waiting to learn about my teaching load and schedule. I had no roster and no teaching materials, no ability to prep. Students wandered the building without direction. The first day of that first year was a signal of things to come. I felt particular concern for the well-being of students at Chemawa. They suffered from depression, isolation, loneliness, and homesickness on a regular basis. Though the school had access to behavioral health services from Indian Health Service, which was on our campus, students were limited in their ability to request and receive help. Sadly, one student who is actively suicidal was discharged from school rather than given wraparound services. When she returned home, she was successful in her suicide attempt. Supervisors at the school focused on liability rather than high-quality instruction and a healthy learning environment. They seemed to operate based on fear of BIE sanctions rather than on what was best for creating a healthy school climate. The result was a loss of the human element that is so critical to effective and impactful education. High-level supervisors were based in Albuquerque and were detached from the students and faculty they were supposed to oversee. It broke the line of communication and hampered authentic supervisions. Despite these and other warning signs, I was fully committed to my teaching position and frankly, honored to be teaching Native students, which is deeply personal to me. This is what I set out to do and is what kept me at Chemawa. I always received exemplary teaching reviews. My teaching practice was never under scrutiny. In fact, I was a teacher whose classroom was showcased when high-profile visitors, such as our supervisors from Albuquerque, would come in. But I was personally unsettled and uncomfortable with the school. I was particularly disturbed by how little student well-being and safety was emphasized. School culture was broken or absent. For example, students were filming fights in the dorms and posting them on YouTube without consequence. I was very concerned about their safety and raised this issue with my supervisor. Rather than address the fighting, the response was an emphasis on the division between the dorms and academics. Teachers, including me, were told to stay out of dorm life. This was a typical response to any concern. A bureaucratic division of responsibilities and strict chain of command prevented us from reaching any solutions to any problem, no matter the size. Dorm safety in particular was a siloed issue that teachers were not to speak about. If we tried to, it was interpreted as calling into question the professionalism and training of the dorm staff. The issue of student safety in the dorm was never discussed in faculty meetings or openly. In fact, my supervisor directed all staff to refrain from sending emails or otherwise trying to start a conversation about student safety. I was highly concerned with the lack of ethics at the school. In one instance, I came under pressure to change an 11th grade English student's grade from an F to a D. When I requested to meet with the family rather than change the grade, a guidance counselor sat in on the meeting with the student's transcript. I saw that not only had he passed my class on the transcript, but he was getting credit for 2 additional English classes that he did not take. On another occasion, I was harassed when I refused to sign documents saying I was in special education meetings that I never attended. My refusal to partake in unethical and illegal behavior regarding students with disabilities turned me into a target of the special education department. My complaints to my supervisor, my first contact in a strict chain of command, went unanswered despite repeat follow-ups. Whether it was in regards to harassment from a hostile coworker or concerns about troubled students or major infrastructure issues such as a leaky roof and a freezing classroom in the winter, I followed the chain of command with as much fidelity as possible. I first went to my supervisor and then to her direct supervisor, the superintendent. He informed me that he was not allowed to communicate with or provide supervision to my supervisor, and therefore his hands were tied. Our area director was never available, and school board meetings were closed to faculty. With no other place to turn, I decided to send an email to the deputy director of the BIE. In response, I got a letter of reprimand, and this is when the retaliation began. I was forced into professional isolation from other faculty because I was afraid that if I complained about anything, I would have further disciplinary measures taken against me. These boarding schools were founded to kill the Indian and save the child. While much has changed, unfortunately, at some of these schools, we are not even saving the child. Thank you for providing me with this opportunity.
Thank you. Next witness will have Ms. Beatrice Willis.
Mental and behavioral health issues are a neglected area at Bureau of Indian Education-run schools for Native American students. And when the schools are aware of these problems, many of the parents are never informed. This is what happened to my son, Marshall Everett Friday III, a student at Chemawa Indian School during all 4 of his high school years. He was sent home several times for behavioral health-related issues and attended other public schools in Washington and Oregon as well. Many of the write-ups he received were said to be bogus by many of the school staff. Many said that Marshall had most likely been singled out. But there were many more severe issues with Marshall. He was 18 years old when he died in Tualatin, Oregon, May 30th, 2017, just 2 weeks after his high school graduation from Chemawa. Unknown to me, Marshall was suffering from severe depression with suicidal ideations and had been hearing voices telling him to hurt himself since 2014. Marshall had told me he was on medication for depression and anxiety, and the school and clinic never informed me of anything different. Our family believes he turned to drugs because he could not get his medications, and he was using air duster to get relief from the mental issues affecting him. Marshall also suffered from untreated ADHD, although the school knew that he had this disorder. Marshall died from a toxic amount of the chemical found in air duster, which caused him to have a massive heart attack. I found him turned on his side, face down in his room at 10:14 p.m. He died at 5:26 the following morning. He was brain dead before he reached the hospital. Marshall was using other drugs as well as air duster to lessen the effects of his mental conditions. Marshall had medication refills for his issues sitting at the Indian Health Service clinic the Friday before he died. The clinic refused to send those pills to him, and we lacked the funds to go down and pick him up that day. We lived just less than 50 miles from Chemawa. Marshall finished school early in March, and would go back to walk with his class on May 12th. In early April, Marshall was told by the school he could not attend prom or any other functions at the school, public or private, since he was no longer a student there, although other alumni are allowed to attend any public events. Marshall was told he could not even be involved in senior week activities at the school. The same week in April, Marshall was sent to the hospital for abusing air duster, as well as cited by police for abusing the chemical. Marshall would have 4 police contacts and 2 emergency room visits where he was found unresponsive on the side of the road within a 1-month period. The school was not totally at fault. I had set up an evaluation for Marshall at a local substance abuse center, but had accidentally told him to go to the wrong center on his appointment date. We never made another appointment. I believed he had stopped. All the odors and all the signs associated with use, police calls, emergency room visits, scrapes and bruises he had when he was using were gone. During his junior year, Marshall had suffered from chest pains while running track, although it was not known to myself until Marshall told me. The school never called. He was later sent to a facility in Kaiser, Oregon to receive tests on his heart, and I've never been told what facility or what the results of those tests were still. Marshall suffered from a massive heart attack that left him brain dead and his organs slowly giving out over the course of the night of May 29th to 30th. After being revived 3 times, we decided to let him go. His heart rate wouldn't stay up high enough to keep him alive. Marshall is buried at Friday Cemetery in Easity, Wyoming. The results of his autopsy show he had an open heart murmur. A member of the staff at the school told me on one occasion that when a parent allows their child to attend Chemawa, they basically make their child a ward of the court, and the school becomes parentis ad litem, or the child's guardian while they were in school. In BIE boarding schools for Native American students, they must justify a need to go by getting permission from their tribal social services. The school also makes them apply for Medicaid in order to use any outside facilities for medical treatment besides the clinic there in Kaiser. Since Marshall's death, federal legislation is now being drafted, proposed federal legislation is now being drafted and hopefully presented to the U.S. legislature in the near future to help protect students with mental and behavioral health issues. Our family hopes to see a memorial scholarship fund and small business grant program put in place. Baldwin Crocker and Red of Lander, Wyoming are drafting the bill and are leading the promotion of the draft along with our family. It is to be called the Marshall Friday Plan, and is to help children with behavioral health issues and their families to know more about them. Myself, the tribal lawyers, Lee Spoonhunter, chairman of our tribe, and Andrea LeBeau-Quipler hope to be here to present that. Ho-ho, and thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, we'll have Ms. Teresa Keith.
My name is Teresa Keith. My daughter was Melissa Abel. She passed away at the Chemawa dorm room on December 14th of 2014. It was her senior year, and I can't read this. I just got to speak how I feel. She we had a really hard time after finding out, well, one, it's hard to get that phone call that your child is no longer alive and you need to go see her. But when we got there and we got no information other than, they really didn't know what happened. Later on, I had requested the autopsy reports, we had requested the police reports, anything we could, and later on found out that while my daughter laid there struggling for her life, her roommates and her friends ran to try and find staff. Staff was nowhere to be found. They went back to try and help her again, and then they went to try and find staff again, which they finally successfully found staff, which that staff member then called over the CB, so whatever kind of code they use, and the other staff members said that it was a code for a fight. So while my daughter lay there fighting for her life, everybody thought there was a fight in her dorm room and not that it was a medical emergency. While we were there, I wish my husband was here because he remembers so much more than I do. While we were there, we were asked if we were going to be taking any kind of legal action. And at the time, I was just, no. In a state of shock, and they told us that was a good thing because it might be the end of Chemawa if we did. And it's not, and in the past 4 years, we've tried contacting people, we've tried doing legal things and stuff, and not knowing where I can go or what we can do. It was more people thought that I wanted to sue Chemawa. It's not about money. There's no amount of money that will make me feel better. What will make me and Melissa's family and her friends and other children and parents at Chemawa is to better their trainings, better their schooling on their health, their safety, things like that. My heart goes out to the girls that were there that were trying to save my daughter's life, because no child should have to see that. No child should have to be put in that position. And if they can just, the safety of our kids, that's our future. We were raised, you teach your children and you honor your elders, and I just don't feel that they were there for my daughter. And the more I see, I don't think that changes need to be made. And I would like to thank you for having this, because I feel like finally something might be done. Something might come to light. And it's a good place for the kids, because the kids need that, but they need to be safe. They need to be cared for. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Keith. Now, our final witness on this panel is Ms. Joy Rennick.
Thank you, Chairman Gallego and Ranking Member Cooke. I've heard it said that institutions get the exact results they are organized to get. Nothing could be more true of Chemawa Indian School. In many ways, Chemawa's boarding school status gives it the ideal situation to ensure outstanding education and opportunity for Native American youth. Unlike many schools, Chemawa doesn't face the challenge of educating students who go home to traumatic or unstable home environments each night. That is not to understate the difficulties that many Chemawa students bring with them to school, including chemical dependency, lack of previous education, family trauma, and legal troubles. Despite these complex circumstances, Chemawa truly can and should be a refuge for students where they can focus on creating opportunities for themselves through education. However, the low expectations and inconsistency of school administration and a murky accountability system have created an organization at Chemawa that repeatedly sets students up to fail, or worse. Students often come to Chemawa with drug and alcohol dependency. Many of my students shared with me that they had been in treatment multiple times before 9th grade. Because of this reality for students, it is the administration's responsibility to plan for needs by investing in counseling, medical support, and consistent supervision. None of these exist for Chemawa students, and administration cites lack of funding as the reason, though they spend freely on less urgent expenses. Instead of receiving needed support, students are expected to simply detox on campus, sometimes from years of daily use, and any behaviors that accompany this process can be used as strikes against them towards expulsion. Additionally, chemically dependent students are poorly supervised and faced with ever-changing rules, setting them up to fail and often to seek relief through accessing drugs or alcohol on campus. Even prescription medications, including for significant psychiatric and physical needs, go unfilled for weeks at a time each fall, endangering students and those around them. Ironically, though the administration refuses to support students in recovering from addiction, drug use is often the grounds used to send students home once the school year receives a full year's funding for them on count day in late winter. Although Chemawa exists to provide a high-quality education and home away from home for Native students, few students who start the year at Chemawa remain until May. In 2009, 36% of students were sent home before the end of the school year. In 2011, one of my English classes went from 28 students to 6 students between count day and year's end. I find it difficult to imagine the backlash most public schools would receive if they expelled 36% of their students in 1 year. This begs the question, why is such a result acceptable at a Native school? Students are sent home for reasons that are unclear to students and staff and without due process. In January of 2011, one of my most promising students, Flint Tall, was sent home for arguing with the school counselor. This was despite his incredible gains in academics and behavior and a recent nomination into honors English. I and other staff advocated for Flint, but the administration ignored our pleas and those of his mother. A few weeks later, we received word that Flint had been killed in a car accident. Later, I learned that he had not been allowed back in school at Pine Ridge, partially due to Chemawa's reports, from what we understood, and had spent weeks aimlessly until he finally lost his life in a drunk driving accident at 15. The response from many staff members, get used to it, this happens all the time. Students who experience harm while under Chemawa's care are treated with indifference. In my first 2 months at Chemawa, one of my special education students arrived to my class sobbing. When we spoke in the hall, she told me that she had been raped on campus the night before. Not only that, her attacker was the boy sitting directly behind her in my classroom. I later learned that she had reported her attack to the Chemawa administration the night before. They had not provided her counseling or medical treatment, had not separated her physically from her alleged attacker, and stated that they weren't giving credibility to her report because she was special education and probably confused. The principal and counselor at the time quickly put her and her alleged attacker on planes back to their respective reservations, rather than investigating or supporting the students, denying the young lady nearly a year of education because she had reported being assaulted, and ensuring that the young man faced no accountability if he had raped her. These examples of student harm are merely two among countless. Chemawa's violations of special education law under IDEA have been so numerous that a former SPED teacher was eventually fired as a troublemaker for reporting them. He won a wrongful termination suit and was paid restitution. And students with special needs have not historically received federally mandated services. It is my understanding from current staff that such violations continue today. Although Chemawa sits on several hundred acres that have been long rented out for various commercial uses, Chemawa's leadership has repeatedly refused to disclose where the money is going, despite repeated requests from staff, the media, and the school board. Not long after I left, I received information that Chemawa had been audited by the IRS and significant issues around misuse of student funding were found. One of the greatest barriers to accountability and proper oversight for schools like Chemawa is the lack of clarity regarding jurisdiction. Chemawa is federally funded, Oregon state licensed, and loosely supervised by a line office in New Mexico. In my many attempts to report serious concerns, I was frequently unable to find out who is responsible for which area of accountability. I believe this is where the greatest opportunity for harm takes place. Because no one knows who is in charge of oversight at Chemawa, there is no meaningful oversight at Chemawa. In my nearly 15 years as an educator, I have rarely met students as resilient, thoughtful, creative, and capable as the students I had the privilege to teach at Chemawa. The current state of Chemawa is robbing these incredible youths of their promise, and sometimes even their lives. Bold organizational changes must be made so that a Chemawa run by ethical, culturally responsive educators focused on student good create excellence education and begin to reverse the opportunity gap that currently exists for Native American students. This Chemawa is possible, and with your support and oversight, I have great hope that it will finally exist at last.
Thank you. Thank you again for that valuable testimony. The chair will now recognize members for questions, and under Committee Rule 3D, each member will be recognized for 5 minutes. I'll begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Carson, you noted in your testimony that students often suffer from depression, isolation, loneliness, and homesickness. When you noticed a student expressing or experiencing these behaviors, what policies were in place for you as a teacher to advocate for that student?
The policies in place for advocating for students were tenuous, cloudy, and not policy-driven. So these were typically for each teacher on an individual basis for us to do the work to find out what we could do for the student. Even though there were behavioral health services in place, there was no finite pipeline leading from need to help.
And I have a follow-up on that, so you could clarify that more. So in your opinion, were there adequate mental health services on campus or available? Or there were, but for that child or for that student to get access to it, it was cumbersome to get to it?
It's cumbersome to get to. The Indian Health Service is right there next to the campus, but the pipeline going back and forth is very confusing, and there's no clear guidelines or policies and procedures in place for teachers to report concerns and have it followed up in a standardized way.
Okay. Ms. Beatrice Willis, as a parent myself, I want to thank you for being here today to share your son's story with us. In your testimony, you explained how you were not informed of your son's medical issues, which I think any parent would understand is never okay. Can you describe if and when you were finally contacted with updates about your son from school, other than for disciplinary actions?
I was actually at the school after Marshall had had his chest pains, and I had talked to the dorm supervisor and asked him why he hadn't called me to tell me about it. They said some things about not being able to reach me or whatever and whatnot. Another time I was at the school, Marshall was being sent home. He was being suspended, and he had not received his medications from the school for 5 days. He had lost his student ID, and you have to have your student ID to have them dispersed to you from the medical cart. Marshall, it was a couple days before I was getting paid, and so he didn't want to bother me with it. He didn't tell me. He tried to do community service, which the school allows you, the students to do 4 hours of, but they had nothing for him to do. And so he went 5 days without those meds, and I didn't know he had went that many days with them until I went down to the school. And we were in with the guidance counselor, and that's basically when they told me that they didn't have to tell me about medical concerns with my son, that all the students there at Chemawa are required to apply for Oregon State Medicaid. And that was so they could use the Indian Health Services clinic there and also be provided any outside services. Apparently, there's a Children's Bill of Rights in Oregon that allows kids to apply for medical food stamps, be able to get into housing, homeless shelters and stuff like that because of the amount of homeless students up there. And although it's a federal facility, they used that state law to say that they didn't have to tell me about things like that. I requested a lot of stuff after Marshall had died. I've been giving unredacted versions. I've been told to contact the Bureau of Indian Education for any other things from the school when I still never have received those. I've asked for the information on the result of his heart test from outside of the clinic, and I still haven't received those. I mainly was never really contacted about those things.
So, and just to be clear, so as these issues medical issues were popping up or disciplinary issues pop up, you weren't notified every time something came along?
With the disciplinary
yes,
issues, they would
but
try
not
to
the
contact.
medical?
No.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Keith, thank you again for being here today and also sharing your daughter's story. I have a very similar question. Did you receive any updates about your daughter's health from the school while she was there?
No, none at all. She had been to the eye doctor, the dentist, and the doctor and stuff, and she told me I did not have the school contact me ever.
So as medical or mental health care occurrences occurred, you were not contacted and updated by the school?
No. No.
Did any teachers reach out to you about your daughter's academic performance or experience while she was there?
No.
Okay. Thank you. All right, go back. As recognized Ranking Member Cooke for a line of questions.
Thank you very much for being here. I know this is very, very difficult. I'm really, really concerned about the lack of oversight on some of these situations that seem to be repeated instances. And I got to be honest with you, I'm from California, where we have a different set of rules and everything else, but as somebody that's been in a classroom, you know, I'm shocked. Normally, the Teachers Association, the faculty, I was Academic Senate President, and I'll be honest with you, sometimes with the administration, it was not always, we didn't always get along, and sometimes we actually had to take action about one particular dean. I'm going to ask you, and this might be very difficult, but I'm looking for something that this committee could do. And that is, if you had 3 things, real short if you could, that you think this committee could help you with in terms of correcting this, in terms of legislation, in terms of letters to and from certain individuals, and under the auspices of this committee, certain organizations that we should be in contact with. Anybody on the committee?
I could make a few recommendations I wasn't able to get to when I spoke to you earlier. I would start.
Excuse me, and by the way, if you do have recommendations that we don't cut off, because he always cuts me off on time, I'd still be interested, and you can submit them afterwards for the record, and I'd really, really like that.
Okay.
For the record, we have a very good working relationship.
Yeah, but you always watch the clock.
So ensure that the supervisory chain of command has more physical proximity to the location of the schools. So, for example, we had our area offices located in Albuquerque. Our line officer was located in Seattle, I believe. And so their physical proximity to the school created several challenges that I think could be ameliorated by having more local jurisdiction over the school. That supervisors are more involved in the day-to-day operations of the school, and that they contribute to the daily operations of the school, that's a requirement for their positions.
Anybody else?
I think that if the school could be a little bit more open with us about the issues they're having with our kids, whether they be medical, mental health, behavioral health, or even just disciplinary issues, if we could be informed of what's going on with our children in the beginning and they could just be more open with us with the circumstances of events, then I think it would make a big change. And
How about us doing certain things? How we
But-
could help you?
Our tribal lawyers are drafting what they're calling the Marshall Friday Plan right now, and they plan on bringing it back here to be presented. And what that would do is just make BIA schools inform us of the issues going on with our children. And so that's something I'm really supportive of.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I just think holding the schools accountable for the negligence that is going on, and making sure that the policies get changed on the chain of command and their communication. I mean, I'm all about communication. I want to know how my child is doing. She's not home. And, you know, I just think that's important.
Yes, ma'am.
One recommendation that I would have would be empowerment of the school board. The school board members are tribal members typically, and have spoken out consistently with concerns about the things that are happening at Chemawa, from financial gray areas to student supervision. And it's my understanding that when they've requested information, that information has been denied repeatedly. And even though they are in name in charge of oversight of administration policies and staffing, they don't seem to have any real authority vested to make any changes. And certainly in the area of cultural responsiveness, they don't have the authority to really call things out that are taking place that shouldn't be. I think another thing is that staff who are very dedicated to student good and have spoken out about these issues are typically not at Chemawa for very long, because there is not a clear chain of command or a clear system of being able to report things, and so retaliation, specifically around pay cuts, is huge. Additionally, a common experience that we've had as teachers is that when we're hired at Chemawa, the pay that we're told that we'll receive is not the pay that we actually do receive. This has gone on for years, and it does create significant financial hardships for teachers who want to be there and who would like to remain for many years but possibly can't afford to. And even though it's known that this is the case, that's never communicated, and it's created a longevity problem.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank the panelists. I know it's very difficult, and share those stories with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranking Member Cooke. I'd now like to recognize Representative Holland.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you so much for assembling this extremely important hearing, and thank you all so much for being here this afternoon and essentially pouring your hearts out to us. It's important that we know and understand the emotion and the feeling behind it. And to the two teachers, I value you incredibly. I appreciate your dedication, and I just know how important teachers are in our society, and I'm sorry that you didn't get the help you needed when you were there. So thank you for being here today. I want to express my sincere condolences to the two moms who are here for the loss of your children, and the courage that it's taken for you to come here in front of Congress today. I understand how painful this must be. I also understand how expensive this trip to DC is, and thank you for coming to speak with us. In March, the Pueblo of Laguna, which is where I'm enrolled, lost a high schooler, Darian DeWayan, to suicide at Haskell Indian Nations University, which is a post-secondary school that the BIE oversees. This was a significant loss in my Pueblo of a young, vibrant person, and I have compassion for the pain that your families are experiencing. This morning, my office met with education advocates who also told us about suicides that have taken place at the BIE Crystal Boarding School on the Navajo Nation and at Dene College by students who lack mental health resources and integration programs in BIE schools. It's no secret that the BIE schools have historically underperformed, although it's the nation's most expensive educational system that is failing 183 schools for Native American children in 23 states. This is a department that continues to fail our children so substantially that a 2015 Politico article stated BIE students performed worse than every major urban district in the country except Detroit. This is a failure of the federal government and completely unacceptable. The questions I will ask will help provide clarity on the issue to see what we can do. And first, I'd like to address Ms. Rennick, your comment about the school board, because the school boards are, they're window dressing, right? They're advisory boards who don't have any teeth at all. They can make all the recommendations in the world and nobody has to listen to them. And that absolutely has to change. I have experience with that, and I appreciate you raising that issue. And I am strongly in favor of working to make those changes. So thank you for that. Ms. Carson, thank you for your bravery in shining a light on these issues, especially while you were still employed at Chemawa. As a teacher there, you described a culture of punishment for speaking out on concerns. What is your recommendation for how, and we kind of asked this already, for how BIA can provide an avenue for accountability to the boarding schools it runs?
I think there's a disconnect between a federally run organization and a school that's supposed to be ensuring children's futures. Those things sometimes don't mesh well together. And so in the structure of a school and in the structure of a federal entity, something needs to change. So there's so much talk about chain of command at Chemawa. chain of command, followed the chain of command, followed the chain of command, that sometimes problems don't get solved because one person, the onus is put on that one supervisor to fix the problem, and if they're not able to do it, we're to go up the chain. And I think that's something that needs to be looked at, that we're educating youth. It's supposed to be a nurturing environment, yet we have this very sterile chain of command stricture that we have to follow that doesn't always fit what a school should be. And I think that it's important to consider how we can bridge that.
How often did the line officer come to the school to just talk to people or see what was happening there?
I would say once every few months, so maybe twice a year, 2 or 3 times a year.
And did any of the concerns that you expressed to him, I'm sorry, Chairman, did he ever follow up on any of those? I say he, but it could have been a she
Teachers
also.
weren't typically able to get access to the education line officer.
Thank you. We'll now recognize Representative Bonamici.
Thank you, Chairman Gallego and Ranking Member Cooke. Thank you especially to the witnesses. I request unanimous consent to enter into the record an opening statement that expresses many of the concerns about abuse, fraud, mismanagement, and lack of safety at Chemawa Indian School outlined by the witnesses and my colleagues. I request unanimous consent, Mr. Chairman.
So moved. Accepted.
Thank you, and I also request unanimous consent to enter into the record a copy of the Oregon Public Broadcasting 5-part investigative report from Chemawa from 2017.
Without objection, accepted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This was very powerful testimony. I want to start, Ms. Willis and Ms. Keith, thank you so much for being here and telling your stories. As a parent, I can't imagine what you went through and what you're still going through. And thank you for your courage in being here, and your presence, I think, demonstrates your courage, and it will help other students. Ms. Willis, you talked about Marshall and how he had a tough relationship with Chemawa. You told a story about how he felt targeted by faculty, did not get the support he needed, tried to leave but missed the camaraderie that the school was intended to provide. And you talked about how he struggled to get critical attention, especially mental health and addiction services, and he was sent home more than once. That separation, I could tell how it was devastating to him to be, separated from the community. And his tragic death in Tualatin, Oregon, which I'm quite familiar with, in the district I'm honored to represent, shortly after leaving school, is just heartbreaking. And of course, Flint Tall, who Ms. Rennick discussed, and more recently, Robert Tillman, both died shortly after leaving Chemawa, raising serious alarms about student safety. They were 15 years old. And of course, Ms. Keith, thank you for sharing your story too about Melissa. You've raised some serious concerns. Ms. Willis, the concerns about sending students home, and I want to ask you and then ask Ms. Keith, what could Chemawa have done differently? How could they have helped Marshall and Melissa?
With Marshall, I believe if they would have just informed our family of the behavioral health issues he had, what they really were, I've had another child that had some of the similar issues that Marshall had, and we got him the help he needed. We would have focused on making sure that Marshall would have gotten the right mental health plan, the right meds while he was home. We didn't realize what his real mental and behavioral health issues were. And if they would have just been open with us and told us when he left from the school what behavioral health plan he was on and what the medications were for, we could have followed through with everything at home.
Did anybody at Chemawa ever explain why they didn't tell you that information?
Because of the Children's Bill of Rights and the fact that kids can apply for Medicaid at the age of 15 in Oregon, and also because they said that when we allow our children to go to boarding school, well, on our reservation, I believe on most, you have to have a paper signed by your tribal social services or child protection services that shows a need for your child to attend, and Marshall's was social. He had he quite didn't fit in where he was because of who he was.
And I'm going to run out of time, but I want to ask Ms. Keith, what they could have done differently to help Melissa?
They could have been there.
Been there for her? Yeah.
They could have been there. I don't know if they do their regular rounds or whatever they, apparently they are trained for CPR, but I was also told that just because you have CPR training doesn't mean that you have to use it, that you're obligated to use it. That needs to be changed. That kind of thought process needs to be changed, because they're there, and if somebody needs medical attention, if I see somebody on the side of the street, I'm gonna stop and help them. This
Yeah.
is their job, you know?
Thank you.
They need to.
Thank you so much. And I want to ask in my remaining minute, Ms. Carson and Ms. Rennick, thank you so much for your willingness to speak candidly. And I know, Ms. Carson, you talked about trying to go outside the chain of command because you weren't getting answers. For both of you, what should the top priorities be for getting educators the tools and support they need to make sure that Chemawa students are safe? If you could just list off a couple, each of you, top priorities for educators. We know where they're trying. They should need to recruit and train and hire more Native staff for one thing, but what are your ideas?
I
for
think what you
educators?
just spoke to is a large concern that some sort of requirement for having qualified administrative staff specifically. I think you heard in the OPB reporting about the history of nepotism and how even many of the current administration were hired without proper credentialing and had relatives there. They are non-native, and there isn't oversight about how that process is done, and certainly doesn't seem like there was a true open search for those positions to be filled.
Thank you. And Ms. Carson?
I think there's a strong trend of reinventing the wheel each school year with the rapid changes in administration. So how are we going to recruit administrators that are long-term administrators as well as educational staff and teachers? I think that's another issue that comes to light when you have a whole new era with a whole new administrator, and that happens every year.
Thank you. And I'm out of time. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Mr. Cooke for a follow-up question.
Thank you. I won't take long. I just wanted to follow up on that question about the chain of command. And many people know that I was in an organization that believed in that very, very strongly, in the United States Marine Corps. But even with that, one of the best mechanisms that we had was a request mass. And that means private PFC could go right to the top and talk to someone about a problem, something that's going wrong, or what have you. No interference by anybody from the school, the military, what have you, where it goes. And since you mentioned that the chain of command was constantly, I think this is one way that businesses have the whistleblower and things like that. So I just throw that on the table as one of the considerations, perhaps. Sorry.
Thank you, Ranking Member Cooke. Now I'd like to recognize Representative Schrader.
Thank you very much, Chairman Gallego and Ranking Member Cooke. Really appreciate having this hearing and allowing me to wave on to the subcommittee. I'm really proud to represent Chemawa Indian School. It's in my district in Salem, Oregon. And its success, I think, is critical for Indian country, just like the other BIE boarding schools around our country. I'd like to request unanimous consent, as Representative Bonamici did, enter my opening statement for the record, please.
Without opposition, so ordered.
I want to thank our witnesses for coming here today. Pretty heartfelt stories, some tough times, very, very tough times for everyone, and basically rounds out the experience that the Oregon congressional delegation had visiting the school and talking with some of the folks there. I think we all want to make Chemawa a safe and supportive environment, for Native American students across the West. Make sure BIE has the resources, the staff, and frankly, the cultural change to do what we've asked them to do for many, many years. This isn't new to this administration. This has gone on for 20, 30 years from my conversation with my folks back in Oregon. And it's just got to stop. It's just got to stop. I have never been so outraged in my congressional career, short as it may be, with the lack of information I could get from these folks. The teachers that want to talk to us, the students that want to talk to us, they can't. They're just not allowed to talk to their elected members of the United States Congress who represent them. I mean, that to me is unconscionable and goes at the core of what this great country is all about. And as ranking member talked about, we all have chains of command, and you do that to have an efficient organization. But when things aren't working, you have to be able to get your point across without fear of retaliation. I'm just a little old country veterinarian in the real world, but I counted on my line staff to tell me what was really going on. You guys, the parents, the teachers, the students, they're the front line. I'm, supposedly making some decisions, but I don't make good decisions unless I get good information from the folks that are detailing this every day. So, if I may, Ms. Carson, Ms. Rennick, a little bit on a little bit more on that chain of command and how you found it blocked you from getting your concerns across to help these students, help the parents understand what was going on. Is there a more effective system you might devise?
I will just say briefly that both Ms. Rennick and I don't want to speak for Ms. Rennick, but when we tried to follow the chain of command, we were still given a letter of reprimand because we went outside of the chain of command, even though we followed the chain of command. So that circular logic that there really was no pathway, so we need to give more options to those who are being supervised under this structure of how to gather information and how to share information with supervisors.
Ms. Rennick?
I would agree with that. One of the documents, or large chains of documents that we were able to submit to OPB during the course of the reporting on Chemawa's situation was a large number of emails back and forth to the principals that we sent during the time. Unfortunately, the academic principal was not on campus for actually months of the year, the 1 year that I was there before needing to leave, and requesting support, bringing issues to light, and the response was typically, it's out of my hands, or I'm not on campus, I'll deal with it when I come back, or no response. And so out of desperation, seeing what was happening with the students, we eventually went to the next level, which was the superintendent, who told us that he wasn't allowed to supervise her per his orders from the line office, and kind of continued from there until we eventually just sent it straight up the chain. But some sort of a transparency about who you go to next, and that there is permission to do that, and just the assurance that that isn't met with retaliation, I think would.
The sad part is, if I may add on to that, is you're not going to get any help at the top. Because I had a phone conversation August 20th, 2018, after repeated attempts to get information about, well, who put this gag rule in place. And Secretary Teshuta very, very honestly at one point said, well, it's me. I told people they're not allowed to talk to you. And made no apology for that. That is terrible. So these poor people trying to go up the chain of command, try and find some way to get some help. There is no help. The culture at BIE is so messed up. And there's no gol darn school board out there either. Representative Holland is exactly correct. About a week before we got there, they put together this slapdash school board, supposed to represent the majority, the majority of the school board represents the tribes with the most students, et cetera, there. There was no school board. They ran around with some of our local tribes to try and get people to actually be pro forma, just window dressing, as Representative Holland said, to look at that. This is a horrible situation, need of a lot of help, and I think that it starts at the top by making sure we protect people from retaliation when they are concerned about what's going on at these BIE schools. And I yield back, sir.
Thank you, Representative Schrader. Now I'd like to recognize Representative Soto.
Thank you, Chairman. I've often thought this committee is here to right the historic injustices that so many Native American tribes have experienced over the history of this nation and prior to it. And I first want to just say to Ms. Willis and Ms. Keith, not only do you have our apologies, but we will honor your losses with action, which I think is probably far more important today. We know the history of Native American education in this country. It's a history of kidnapping, of cultural eradication, of Eurocentric brainwashing. And while we've gotten a little bit beyond that by the 1870s and beyond with the Chemawa Indian School, with some improvements, we see here there's a culture of silence and secrecy with mismanaged funds, lack of accountability, struggles to provide the necessary services to keep students safe and to mistreat staff. So some of the ideas I heard today are very helpful. Ms. Carson and Ms. Rennick, if we had a confidential whistleblower process with incentives for teachers to come forward, do you think that would be helpful?
Most definitely, and I think you would have many more teachers coming forward.
Ms. Rennick?
Agreed.
And if we had an inspector general answerable to Congress, would that be helpful? That one beyond answering to the Bureau of Indian Affairs? Do you think that would be helpful?
Yes.
Ms. Rennick?
I believe so, as long as there was an opportunity for them to be closely connected to the school.
And Ms. Willis and Ms. Keith, if we had a parent advocate, someone that you could talk to directly, or other parents now in the future who face similar issues, and one that would have to provide you with basic information, do you think that would be helpful?
Yes, if they could be fully communicated with what's going on academically, mentally, I mean, everything.
If that person could give us even progress reports of what's going on with our children rather than through email, because a lot of people don't, we do, but a lot of parents don't have access to email all the time. And so they don't know what's going on with their kids. But if we could get a phone call every now and then, just letting us know where our kids are at.
Thank you, and with that, I yield the remainder of my time to the gentle lady from New Mexico.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Soto. I have one question for Ms. Rennick. Your testimony states that Chemawa expelled 36% of their students in 1 year. Can you tell us if the BIE or the school provided or has provided any follow-up or support to these expelled students, and what the school administration and BIE can do to help avoid this from happening?
I think the murky accountability systems and the nebulous processes that Chemawa operates under that teachers are not privy to prevents me from speaking fully to that question. But as far as I understand, and based on OPB's reporting, Flint Hall, as an example, returned to Pine Ridge Reservation after being expelled, and the reporting was that even because of Chemawa's negative report of his behavior, it created an additional barrier for him to get back into his tribal school. So not only was there not support and follow-up, but that in addition to that, another barrier was created so that he couldn't even attend school where he was.
Thank you. I have one last question, but I just want to say that every single person on this dais believes extremely strongly that every single child in this country deserves to have a quality education. So I know that all of us here and our colleagues who aren't here we'll do everything we can to make sure that this is solved and remedied. And I just had one quick question of Ms. Willis and Ms. Keith. In your opinion, what's the cultural presence at the school? Is there a cultural presence at the school? Is there a cultural presence that helps the students feel like they're connected to their culture and that the school supports that?
I myself don't think there was a strong enough cultural presence before. It's my understanding that this school year they have some new residential advisors that are really focusing in on providing more cultural things for the students and things that are more relevant to their tribal traditions and stuff. But it's my understanding that's never really happened until this school year.
Ms. Keith?
For my experience, I've seen my daughter more excited about learning from the other students, their culture, and just because it was interesting for her, so she would share her stories with me. But as far as participating in certain things, there wasn't a whole lot.
Thank you, and I have to believe that that a cultural presence is needed at any Indian school, speaking from experience. Thank you.
Thank you to all our witnesses for coming and giving us your heartfelt stories. It really does have an impact, and it will make a difference. And we will now be seating the second panel.
Thank you for my additional question.
Yeah, bud. Anytime.
when I take my glasses off and I can't see them. I put my glasses on and I can't see them.
Thank you to our witnesses that have just sat down. Our following panelists are going to be Mr. Mark Cruz, his Deputy Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs for Policy and Economic Development at the U.S. Department of Interior, Ms. Sonia Moody Jurado, former Chair of the Chemawa Indian School Board, and Ms. Tiana Casey, Youth Advocate for the Native American Youth and Family Center. We'll start with your testimony, Mr. Mark Cruz.
Good afternoon, Chairman Gallego, Ranking Member Cooke, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the invitation to appear today on behalf of Indian Affairs. On the behalf of Indian Affairs to discuss our off-reservation boarding schools. And I want to thank the panelists from Panel 1 and my fellow panelists here for their stories. I am Mark Cruz. I'm a member of the Klamath Tribes of Oregon. I grew up in Klamath Falls, Oregon, so it's good to be here, Congressman and Congresswoman. I was appointed Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy and Economic Development for Indian Affairs at the Department of Interior last September. The Bureau of Indian Education directly operates 4 off-reservation boarding schools in 4 states: Riverside Indian School in Anadarko, Oklahoma, Sherman Indian School in Riverside, California, Chemawa Indian School in Salem, Oregon, and Flandreau Indian School in Flandreau, South Dakota. Additionally, there are 3 tribally controlled boarding schools. I would be remiss in today's testimony if I did not mention the commitment of our teachers and school administrators across the BIE. I know them firsthand based on my own service, as I taught at St. Francis Indian School in South Dakota. Every day, the department and my colleagues give our best to provide the highest quality education to all of our Native American students. We give everything to ensure that students have access to the holistic support necessary to develop positive and healthy lifestyles and have the academic skills to excel in the modern economy. Chairman Gallego, Ranking Member Cooke, I'll be quick with my statement as I'd like to update the subcommittee on a number of different actions the department has taken to address some of the concerns noted in others' testimony. So I want to thank you for holding this hearing, and I pledge to work with the subcommittee and the full committee in finding resolutions and answers to the well-identified problems. So I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cruz. Our next panelist will be Ms. Sonia Moody Jurado.
Jayla Sonia Wamneshi. Hello, my name is Sonia Moody Jurado, and I'm here today to talk about Chemawa Indian School. Chemawa is a special place for me. Many of my family members have worked at Chemawa, including my mother, for almost 30 years, and 2 of my aunts that were removed to Chemawa Indian School over 80 years ago. I am the immediate past chair of Chemawa Indian School, serving in that position from 2015 to 2018. This year, my position on the school board was not renewed. It is time for an honest discussion of the school's failures and, more importantly, how we can set Chemawa and its students up on a course of success. I am not here to place blame on any political party, administration, or on any individual. The problems at Chemawa are decades old, and many of them are endemic in the BIA system. But all of us here, congressmen, administration officials, parents, and friends, we bear the responsibility to make that change. I am here because I care about the students and the Indian children that attend Chemawa and will attend Chemawa. Let me give you a symbolic example. Since last fall, the Siletz and Lummi tribes have been working to place 2 commemorative totem poles at Chemawa, one at the school and one at the cemetery where students from over 100 years ago are buried and have never returned home. The totems sit in storage because the school is operated by BIE and the cemetery is owned by BIA. BIA has yet to approve the placement of the totems. The school has stopped mowing and taken care of the Chemawa Cemetery because it is belonged by BIA and not BIE. This is just an example of the total dysfunction of Chemawa. Indian children as young as 6 years old are buried in the cemetery. They should not be caught in a power struggle between BIA and BIE. They died alone with no family while in the care of the Department of the Interior. And their final resting place deserves to be treated with compassion and respect. As for the living, the situation is not much better. Chemawa has serious cultural problems that negatively impact students, their education, and their lives. Let me provide you some examples. The school board was presented with carefully worded PowerPoint presentation. Administrators occasionally handpicked students to speak with us, but were given strict talking points. All other students and staff were forbidden from speaking to visitors. Employees at Chemawa are not respected in the same way that teachers and staff in public school systems are. Those at Chemawa are employed in single 9-month contracts, reviewed, renewed, or terminated every year. This makes it easier for administration to fire staff. Of course, it's not called firing. The technical term is non-renewal of contract. Staff are required to wear 1 Chemawa t-shirts. Repeated complaints were met with administrative staff wearing buttons that read "No whining." This sends a message to staff and students that their opinions do not matter. Before, protests from school board members and the union and staff were forbidden to wear traditional regalia to tribal graduation. That's an odd prohibition for Oregon's only all-Indian school. Yet if staff wanted to attend graduation, they had to take leave or check out for their half-hour lunch. Additional time to attend graduation must be taken from their vacation allotment. At a higher altitude, the school struggles with a larger system that is clearly broken. Neither the BIA nor BIE have been able to provide attention, fill positions, and support the students and staff that Chemawa deserves. It can take years to fill regional or administrative positions such as BIE Regional Director in Seattle or even the school superintendent. This creates chaos. Of course, the serious challenge is the student safety for Indian children that have died at the school due to negligence, others from accidents, and suicide remains a serious risk. Any way you look at Chemawa, it is in total crisis. I respectfully offer you the first steps along that path to change. BIE needs to provide staff and students a venue to register concerns about the school without fear of retaliation. The school board needs to be empowered to independently review the administration of Chemawa. Additional resources should be allotted for 24-hour mental health services to meet the needs of the students. More culturally based training and historical and trauma-informed care for the students and staff should be made available. And BIE needs to conduct oversight visits to speak confidentially with students, academic, residential, and support staff on what is working at Chemawa and where improvements can be made. Thank you.
Thank you. And our final witness is Tiana Casey.
Chair Gallego, Ranking Member Cooke, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to speak to you today. Nish Pashwai, Inashwanisha Tiana Casey, Kushwashna Shataikni. Good afternoon, my name is Tiana Casey, and I am from Warm Springs. The language I am speaking is the Ichiskeen dialect of Sahaptin, a traditional language of my people. Today I speak on behalf of the National Indian Education Association, the most inclusive national organization advocating for culturally relevant educational opportunities for American Indians, Alaska Natives, and Native Hawaiians. Through this testimony, I share my experiences working with Native students at Chemawa Indian School and urge Congress to address ongoing risks impacting students at federally operated boarding schools. From August 2016 to February 2017, I had the honor of teaching an IHS-funded suicide prevention class called Community Leadership at Chemawa Indian School. With curricula focused on culturally specific trauma-informed care, historic trauma, outdoor science, traditions and culture, and experiential learning, our new class offered the only culture-based education option during school hours. In February 2017, our program suffered unexpected budget cuts to our IHS-funded grant. With 3 business days notice, I was not provided adequate time to say goodbye to all of my students. Countless students reached out to me with confusion and concern regarding the loss of the program. As the only class utilizing culturally relevant trauma-informed care to address students' needs, the loss of this class disproportionately impacted vulnerable students. In preparation for my testimony today, I spoke with a number of former students to gather their thoughts regarding their education at Chemawa. All students felt that Chemawa failed to prepare them for post-secondary success and exposed them to ongoing trauma, which contributed to low self-esteem and mental health issues. In light of these experiences and conversations, I would like to offer the following recommendations. First, Congress must provide oversight and guidance regarding student discipline and expulsion. I had the unique opportunity to teach most students in the school since each student was required to take my class unless they were receiving services through IHS or were facing disciplinary action. When a student was unexpectedly absent, this typically indicated that they would be expelled, an occurrence that became frequent enough that it caused anxiety. Harsh policies often sent students back to unsafe home environments for minor infractions. Zero-tolerance policies for student pregnancies or mental health crises, including suicidal ideations and attempts, exasperated expulsion rates. This resulted in students hiding physical and mental health needs to continue their education. Such policies have resulted in terrible consequences, including the death of multiple students when they returned home after being expelled, and even after graduation. Second, Chemawa must ensure culturally responsive trauma-informed care and educator training. Educators and staff at Chemawa remain ill-equipped to address the ongoing impacts of historic trauma and unique cultural and academic needs of Native students. Due to low numbers of Native educators, very few staff had the cultural knowledge to support students. Students do not see themselves reflected in the curricula or classrooms. From education models that prioritize Eurocentric interpretations of pan-indigeneity to teachers that impose Christian religious beliefs on Native spiritual traditions. Students feel alienated and misunderstood in the classroom. One student recalled a reflection paper in which they wrote that they would feel more self-confident if they saw more of their Indigenous identity in the classroom. At the time, the student was told, "The school is not going to change this just for you." This is unacceptable. All core subjects have the potential to include Native content. Native students must have access to Native teachers and educators that have the cultural training and tools to support their unique needs in the classroom and beyond. Chemawa should form community and student advisory boards to build a school community that reflects the students' needs and the students served. Native education systems have always included community, valuing the impact of each voice, from youth and to elders. There's no voice for either in Chemawa's education model. You may reference in my written testimony to students practicing their freedoms to speech. This was in reference to Marshall Willis leading students to practice that. Student engagement in their own education has the potential to define and achieve holistic academic and community success. Students at Chemawa often felt voiceless. Those that did speak out often feared retaliation from the administration, which contributed to an environment that discouraged students from being open or trusting. Many felt criminalized for the unique cultures, challenges, and their stories. Our students have powerful voices that highlight critical challenges and opportunities to improve school services and support. In closing, a fundamental cultural and social shift of Chemawa has the potential to create an environment where Native students can thrive. Thank you.
Thank you to all our witnesses and for your testimony. Now we'll begin question period. I will recognize myself for 5 minutes and then go to the ranking member. Mr. Cruz, thank you for being here. What internal policies does your department have about whistleblowers in BIE schools? And is there a process for you to receive and act on reports of negligence or wrongdoing?
Thank you, Chairman, for the question. So we actually have the whistleblower protection on the BIE website, bie.edu. And so and it's also in the Interior Department's manual. So all employees, including BIE teachers, adhere to that.
So you just heard the testimony from our 3 previous witnesses and now 2 witnesses. What are the substantial and substantive steps that your department's going to take to fix this situation? 'Cause this seems to be a structural problem that's been going on for many years, and it's now kind of created a culture at this boarding school that's going to be extremely hard to change. So I'd like to hear what are the actual plans to actually change this, make change at least.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've taken critical steps towards improving this situation. As I referenced, there's only a few boarding schools, 100 out of our 169 schools across 23 states. And most of those schools have chosen to go under tribal control, under the Tribally Controlled Schools Act. But for the remaining schools that haven't, the 4 that I referenced, the 3 have very positive environments. Chemawa has unique challenges, though, just because it's got a long legacy there. And so in terms of what the BIE and the department are doing is we're doing a reorg to be more responsive. Additionally, the BIE created a strategic direction last year where they went out for tribal consultation across the country, and that plan is actually on the website as well. And that actually has very specific steps with detailed plans of action that we're currently taking right now, and that's all the way from early childhood education services to wraparound services.
And then, so what are you going to do right now also when members of Congress that represent their area, their constituents, are worried about the school board, the students, and they're trying to get information? There is this culture of just, everyone just be quiet and batten down the hatches. That creates mistrust. Right? When I hear from the Representative Schrader, not just this year, but last year, that he can't get any answers, it tells me that, there's something being hidden there. So what are you going to change right now in terms of, or what are you guys going to do to change that culture? When the representative of Congress asks questions, we should be able to get answers without us having to haul people in a hearing. I'll do it again if I have to, and I'll even include subpoenas, but, this cannot be happening anymore.
Yeah, we take that seriously, and that was a big reason why we worked hard to get you answers in the letter that was sent last year. And, that's our fault. When you're looking at 10 complex questions, and they are complex, and I look forward to explaining them in further detail, that's a lot of people where we have to funnel that up, and that's our internal clearance process. But absolutely, we take all of these allegations and claims very seriously, but it starts at the school with strong school leaders, and I feel fairly confident in the current school leadership at Chemawa that things are changing. Assistant Secretary and I, we visited in May.
We have a limited amount of time that I actually, and I hold myself to the standards. We actually invited school leadership here, and they did not come. Was that in the assistance of your department, or what was the decision-making process there?
Well, it's a school day, and so we felt best that school leadership be at school.
Okay, so if I did this on a non-school day, or I went to Oregon, had a field hearing, then they'd be allowed to actually speak to us?
Yeah, all of our employees with their First Amendment rights and their personal capacity can speak to members of Congress.
So if Representative Schrader goes to campus and tries to meet with teachers, school staff, and school leadership, there is not going to be any effort by your department or anyone else to keep them from speaking to their duly elected representative?
To clarify, there is a notification process that is in the department.
Sure, we'll go through the notification process.
Beyond that, yeah, if it's in their personal capacity, they can speak to members of Congress.
Okay, so and even if it's on the personal capacity, what can Representative Schrader come to the campus, walk around, walk into the principal's office, and have a conversation with the principal?
We look forward to your 3rd visit.
Okay. Thank you. Last question. You mentioned about the BIE reorg. How is that related? Is that at all related to the DOI reorg? And can you explain what the BIE reorganization actually is? BIE reorganization actually is. Mr. Cruz.
Excuse me? I missed that part.
Sure, no worry. You said something about the BIE reorganization.
Yes.
Right? That's not related to the DOI reorganization that we all know about.
Correct.
So what are the specifics about that?
So that's realigning a couple critical functions. Well documented in the GAO reports is the fact that BIE didn't have control over their procurement, school safety inspections, and so what we're doing is we're moving that towards BIE. Also, we've realigned our associate deputy directors, our ADDs, and so Chemawa, being a bureau-operated school, would directly report to the bureau-operated ADD versus the ELOs that was in multiple people's testimony. That's kind of the old system, and so we have an SCS individual there that's more accountable.
And I'd like to see a report on that then. All right, I now recognize Ranking Member Cooke.
I'm not gonna, yeah, I will make this accusation. You guys been hanging around with the military too much or watching reruns of the House Armed Services Committee, acronym after acronym after acronym, and this is a personal bias. Identify what you're talking about, because the rest of everybody else does, but I'm too stupid to get it, so sorry. Going back to the students and everything else, and the board, do you have a student academic senate that is represented on the board? Anyone can, is there a structure in place for that? In other words, students are elected among the students to participate, they represent the interests.
Yeah, I'll go first. When the assistant secretary and I visited at the end of March, we visited with our student council.
Yeah, but do you have, I understand that, but are they also as an ad hoc body to the main board?
Yeah, I'm not sure in this case of Chemawa, but usually a student council member sits on the school board. I know that was the case at St. Francis Indian School, so that's usually customary.
Okay, and the other question I had was about the academic curriculum committee. I'm sure you have one for the schools. And if I were a member of the tribes, I'd want to ensure that the curriculum obviously included those tribal issues and history and things that are so important to the people that's your school. Is that done, or does anybody know? Because all boards are different. I'm talking from experiences in California and the tribes that I have in my district and what have you.
As a school board member, we were never shown curriculum. We were given test scores on the standardized testing, but not shown direct curriculum that is used. I posed the question if they were going to be following Senate Bill 13, which the state of Oregon just passed, which is mandated tribal history of the Oregon 9 tribes, and they stated they didn't have to follow it, but they would look at
Well,
it.
that's very disturbing to me as an educator and for somebody who is obviously very concerned about this. So I would hope that we could correct that.
Congressman, if I may. So the Bureau of Indian Education's in terms of accountability systems that are required by the U.S. Department of Education, they have to adhere to the standards and academic standards in the state in which they're geographically located. That actually changed under ESSA, which passed in 2015, and we're undergoing a negotiated rulemaking. And so the team just commenced and have a draft regulation. We're about to announce our tribal consultation on that, but I will say for the record, all of those members on that NAGREG team were tribal, and that was a considering factor, and so we look forward to additional input from tribes.
Okay, I don't mean to be a dead horse, but I want to make sure there's a mechanism where some of the things that they come up with are part of the curriculum, or everything you say is not correct. So I won't get that excited about. Once again, on the, I'm running out of time here fast, and some of the other things in terms of, we talked about the, whatever mechanism, but I think one of the takeaway themes from here is that I think we all want to make sure that if students or what have you have an issue or a problem or what have you, that it reaches the top. And I'm sure any follow-up hearings, that's going to be one of the main issues, and I'm sure it's going to be a main issue of our two representatives that have joined us today. So thank you very much for being here today, and I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you, Ranking Member Cooke. Now recognize Representative Soto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Deputy Assistant Secretary Cruz, you had mentioned that the whistleblower information's on the website, and obviously it's not being widely disseminated or known, even though people can go on websites. I get that. So what are your ideas to improve that knowledge among teachers and students? Would you commit to having trainings or potentially seminars at each of the schools for administrators, teachers, parents, and students so that everybody knows the chain of command?
Sir, I commit to that, and we'll talk to the Bureau of Indian Education Director to do so.
Great. I had also looked at the website of the Office of Inspector General for the Department of Interior. I used no acronyms in that sentence. Is there a dedicated number of inspectors for the Bureau of Indian Affairs?
Let me get back to you on that if there is, but the way I understand it is there's a very big Inspector General office, and any number of them can be assigned to any issue that comes before them.
So you can, if you could please get back to the committee, how many inspectors, if there are
Absolutely.
any, dedicated to the Bureau of Indian Affairs? Under their website, one of the responsibilities is to scrutinize allegations involving contractors and other entities that they work with. Do you know if there's investigations ongoing at the Inspector General's office with regard to the children of both Ms. Willis and Ms. Keith?
Not to my knowledge.
Can you go back and confirm for us whether there are?
Yes, sir.
And if there are, can you provide our committee with any documents related to that?
Yes.
Thanks. What about the whistleblower concerns of Ms. Carson and Ms. Rennick? Are there files related to their concerns? Did they reach out to you all?
So I don't know the specifics of that particular case, but if it's an HR matter, I wouldn't know that. If it's an IG matter, they would know that, and there's kind of a firewall between the IG and ourselves, so.
Would you commit to getting us those documents, should they exist?
Yes, we can ask the Inspector General.
Thank you. We could maybe have to have an act of Congress about it, but it'd be greater if you all would look at having a parent advocate that would be available, that could go along with these seminars, that parents can talk to as a go-between sometimes, because we're seeing parents get lost in the shuffle here, and I know we all want to make sure that our parents have better communication. So is that something that you will look into?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll look into that, and it's my understanding a number of our BIE schools do have those, so.
Okay, well, it goes back to having those trainings that may be very helpful for students, parents, teachers, and administrators. Ms. Moody Jurado, or Jurado, do you think that the schools would better be served by having an elected school board?
I do, but I think it's very difficult because a lot of tribes know that the school board is just window dressing. It's hard to send someone. We're told right from the beginning that we're advisory only, so we attend a full-day meeting, and each manager goes over a PowerPoint, and that's all. So I think it's difficult. I took issue with
But
signing.
if we made you all elected with certain powers, then it would have some power, and that would potentially help, right?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any advice for us, because there's 80 different tribes that make up some of these schools, how that could be allocated equitably? Like how many members there should be? And
Well, I know currently the top 5 tribes are invited to sit on school board
Okay.
that have the largest number of students.
that structure works as far as representation?
No, because right now it's Arizona, and so they're not near the school. I think
Okay.
that having regional representation would work a lot better, like possibly 1 or 2 from each of the regions that service Chemawa.
Okay. And Ms. Casey, obviously, even though there is information on these websites, is it generally known where parents and students can go to lodge a complaint or seek reforms among our parents and students?
Not to my knowledge, no.
You think having seminars and trainings for parents, students, teachers, administrators would be helpful on the subject?
Absolutely. I feel as if, and not just myself, but this is also coming from my students, as I'm a youth advocate by nature and elevate their voices, but they have expressed that they don't have any say really in any of this. Even though there is a student council, they feel pretty voiceless and powerless, and that is really key to elevating and empowering students in, to learn, empower them to, not limit them.
Thank you.
Chairman Gallegos, can I respond to one of the statements of Mr. Cruz?
Ms. Rada, why don't we let Representative Chairman Grajava ask his questions, and we'll give you some time at the end.
Thank you.
Hearing, very important, and as we exercise an increased role in this jurisdiction, I applaud you. I think this is the kind of hearings we need to, that I think provide us with a better look, and second of all, provide, I think gives us the motivation to go beyond just a hearing and follow up with some actions that I think need to happen, and happen rather quickly. So thank you so much. Ms. Jurado, you wanted to say something in response to somebody said? Please.
I just wanted to respond that Chemawa Indian School graduated students May 3rd, so there's been no students on campus since May 3rd. So the end of the school year is complete.
Okay.
I was going to ask you, if I may, Mr. Cruz, it's my understanding that IHS and BIA have an interagency agreement to increase access to mental and behavioral health services for BIE students. Can you tell us about that interagency agreement and what programs are being implemented, will be implemented to address those two issues with students?
Yeah, I don't know the specifics of that MOU, but from what I understand is, in a couple of instances that I've encountered since being there, is that IHS kind of immediately replies when there's an incident at one of our BIE schools. So if there's an IHS facility nearby, say that a student is really sick, or there's kind of a suicide attempt or some other various health incident, IHS is pretty responsive, in addition to providing behavioral health specialists and then annual kind of physical well-being inspection.
And programming, program with cultural capacity, competence. Do you know in that memorandum of agreement if there is a consideration about for culturally competent staff programming to deal with those two mental and behavioral issues that BIE students might be encountering?
Yeah, I can point.
Capacity to do that?
Yeah, I can point to one anecdote is, there might be a behavioral health specialist that takes our students to sweat ceremony on a weekly basis or on an as-needed basis. And so some of those cultural practices are included in some of the services that they provide.
And last question, if I may, Mr. Chairman. It's both a institutional issue that we're dealing with, and it's also a resource issue that we're dealing with. And part of the institutional issue, and if you can, Mr. Cruz, is the kind of, for me, the kind of lack of transparency that gets information to parents' hands that they know, the kind of defensiveness on the part of the institution itself. And how are you going to deal with those two? The need for the parents' rights to know, staff's ability to interact, the students feeling that they have a place that they can redress whatever their grievances or concerns are, and the need to, I perceive to be very protective institutionally, and that makes it defensive, and to some extent makes it difficult for people, and particularly the tragedies that have occurred to families, to be able to get the kind of, not just empathy, but information that helps with closure, that helps to understand, and more importantly, if there is responsibility, to assess that responsibility. And without it, we don't get answers, and that's been the problem.
Yeah, we look forward to working with the committee on this because it is probably one of our weaker spots and probably one of those angles that hasn't been looked at as thoroughly. But it's such a big school system, not to make an excuse, but you're talking about facilities that the Bureau has to do. We're caring for 42,000 students across 23 states. So it is a very complex issue. So we look forward to working with you on solutions.
But there's also a history with the schools from its inception historically to now, that there is a history of, to be kind about it, problems. There has been a history of misuse and abuse. There has been a history, and I think that that's no longer an excuse. I think that the times have moved such that we can deal with that forthrightly and make the institutional changes that I think are really badly needed in the system as a whole. And I know that involves resources as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now recognized Representative Bonamici.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our second panel of witnesses, Ms. Moody Jurado and Ms. Casey. Thank you especially for your concrete suggestions from your perspective. That's going to be really helpful to us going forward. Deputy Assistant Secretary Cruz, you talked about responding to our questions that we sent in a letter. We sent the letter in June of 2018. We got the response when we walked into the March 2019 meeting with Deputy Secretary Tsuda and Director Dearman. When we walked into the meeting, that's 9 months. A woman can grow a baby in 9 months. It shouldn't take that long to get answers to questions to members of Congress who have a responsibility to make sure that these students are being safe. So I just wanted to point out that that's unacceptable. I'm also, Mr. Cruz, I'm really concerned and alarmed about what happened, what appears to be a pattern of students at Chemawa who have either struggled to get medical care, particularly for mental health and addiction. I'm even more alarmed or equally alarmed about what appears to be a pattern of students being sent home, sometimes for supposedly disciplinary or ostensibly safety reasons, the legitimacy of which has been questioned by families and staff at Chemawa, often without due process. And then sadly, with several students dying shortly after leaving Chemawa, Marshall Friday, Flint Tall, and more recently, Robert Tillman. What steps have Chemawa BIA and BIE taken to prevent this situation from happening again, and how is the staff, student, and tribal input incorporated into all of that? You heard Ms. Casey talk about teaching a suicide prevention class that was interrupted. Obviously, that was an important class. So can you address what are you doing other than ending a suicide prevention class that seemed to be benefiting the students?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it's not an easy topic to deal with, and the Assistant Secretary has made this a very big priority of her student safety. So part of that strategic direction I referenced, there are concrete steps for the BIE to try to be more responsive in that school safety environment and promote school safety. And the other part that makes this very complicated is the HIPAA. What I've been told from our school leaders is when we send a student off-site to an IHS clinic, they don't always get the full scope or understanding of what that student is going through on the medical side. And so there's kind of that firewall. And so we're told on a numerous amount of occasions that we don't always know what's happening on that health side. And so as you can imagine, there's that conflicting statute. And so I would look forward to working with Congress and identifying maybe a responsible way where there could be notification to school leaders.
We look forward to that too. And Mr. Cruz, you said this is not an easy issue. It's also not easy for Marshall's family or Melissa's family or Flint's family or Robert's family. And I submit that it's probably a lot harder for them to deal with this than it is for the Bureau of Indian Affairs and Bureau of Indian Education. Also, you talked about Mr. Cruz, you talked about the harmful history of assimilation of Native youth, and really concerned that the BIE schools are failing to meet the needs of students who have experienced sort of historical trauma. Marshall, we heard about Marshall and feeling more at home with students at Chemawa because of that connection. Congressman Schrader and I have been working with the school. I know they're trying to recruit and retain Native teachers and staff, and we're calling on the BIA to provide more information about recruitment and retention efforts, but we have not received a sufficient response to that request. So we know how important it is to preserve the expression of tribal traditions and customs. I'm really disturbed about the not even allowing students to wear tribal clothing, and that baffles me. I don't understand that. So we've heard that teachers and staff receive a culturally informed 3-day training. So what is that? What's in that training? How can they learn everything in 3 days? And is there evidence it's effective? And what are you doing to improve the recruitment and retention of Native teachers and staff?
Yeah, I don't know about that specific 3-day training, but I will say across the board, Indian Affairs in the two bureaus, we have Indian preference, and so most of our employees need to be Native American, and then we try to do that at the teacher level as well, as get as many enrolled Native Americans in front of the classroom. You know, the education statistics show students do better if they have a Native American teacher in the classroom. And so that's definitely a priority of the BIE. I think where we could work together is there is a significant backlog in the background checks over at OPM. Our teachers need to undergo the same security background check to be in the school. And so whether it's the teacher, whether it's a parent volunteer, BIE really struggles across the system with getting some of those other culturally relevant and specific services in the school because of those background checks.
And quickly, because the time's expiring, you said you don't know about the culture, you can't answer questions about the culturally informed 3-day training. Who can answer those questions if you can't, Mr. Cruz?
Oh, I'll have the Bureau of Indian Education get you an answer for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I recognize Representative Schrader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I request unanimous consent to enter into the record a series of letters from the Oregon delegation of Mr. Teshuta at the Office of the Assistant Secretary, Indian Affairs, IHS, and Department of Education, as well as the responses we received from those agencies.
Without objection, so moved.
Mr. Cruz, feel sorry for you being the sacrificial lamb here. We asked Mr. Teshuta and Mr. Dearborn to show up, and they did not have the intestinal fortitude, so it fell to you. I appreciate it. So my comments are going to be pretty harsh. They're not directed at you. Please rest assured. Well, maybe a couple might be. All due respect, you just stated a moment ago that the reason we don't have supervisors from Chemawa is because they're in school. And you just heard from Ms. Moody Arado that there is no school. They've been out of school since May 3rd. Why'd you tell us that?
Sir, it's my understanding that Laura had a scheduling conflict.
All right, so the bottom line is you don't know what's going on and you're not telling the committee the honest truth. Let's be honest. You stated that there's this whistleblower protection statute. It's not followed. It's window dressing. Your testimony, with all due respect, reads like the responses the Oregon delegation got back from BIA, BIE, a bunch of policies, a handbook that you have that dots all the I's and crosses all the T's, but is not followed, is not implemented, and puts these young people at horrible risk in Indian country. It is a complete lack of management by your agency of these kids' precious lives. totally inappropriate. We're taking steps. We have strategic direction plans. Ask Ms. Willis and Ms. Keith how good they feel about that. How does that help them? How does it help where we're going? I'm concerned. We're asking for help, and we're getting platitudes. That's not what this should be. Indian country deserves the same opportunity every American kid in this country should have, and we're just not seeing it. I want to hear clearly from you, as I alluded to earlier, March 20th, a little over a year ago, 2018, Toshuda told me, hey, we got a gag rule. We're not allowing these folks to talk to you, Congressman, or anybody else for that matter, press, anybody, parents, whatever. You just indicated a moment ago, I don't know how accurate it is given your previous statements, but a moment ago that the gag rule is no longer in effect, that they can talk to me if I call them up tomorrow. Is that correct?
Yeah, in their personal capacity, yes.
Okay, in personal capacity, what does that mean?
They have First Amendment rights to talk to
I would
whoever
like to
they
think
would like.
they do. And without fear of retaliation.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so can you commit to making sure all the Chemawa teachers, staff, students, and parents are aware of that? Because they don't know that now. That's not the rule right now.
Yeah, we'll make sure that communication
And
is
when will that
abundantly
happen,
clear.
sir?
I'll talk to the BIE director to make sure that's done as
Sounds
soon
like
as
chain of command to
possible.
me, so that may or may not happen. I'm a little concerned, given the testimony we've heard here. So can you commit to that's going to happen within the week?
Sir, I can do that. Yes, sir.
All right, appreciate that very, very much. I'm just passionate about the school. I usually don't get too carried away, and I apologize for being a little on the muscle here, but it just bothers me that their First Amendment rights have been denied them up until, hopefully, this new opportunity. And with that comes, hopefully, an opportunity for some of the good practices that both our witnesses here talked about putting into place to prevent some of the problems. Ms. Casey, you talked about the one Chemawa policy. I can't think of a more dehumanizing policy for the vibrant, colorful array of Indian tribes we have in this country to be forced into one white man's view of how you're supposed to present yourself. Could you comment on that a little bit, how that affects the students?
On a daily basis, it affects the students. That's how they begin their day. And I see it, and they comment on it. That was one, every first, I believe it was first period, at the end of first period, they would always comment. If I had the whole classroom to myself, they were very trusting of me, and still many of them are.
And it's to the committee. It's just so emblematic of the lack of sensitivity that BIE have toward Indian country. And I really appreciate the opportunity to have the hearing today. I do hope, and it sounds like a good bipartisan effort to hopefully come up with good ideas to fix some of the problems that are there. And it's going to require some legislation because obviously the culture in BIE historically just can't get it done. So I look forward to working with everybody and want to thank everybody for their indulgence and all the witnesses for all their efforts.
May I provide one more comment? Just in response to Mr. Cruz's comment on sweat lodges, the student sweat lodges are limited to community support, and that's including like federal background checks, so be it. So therefore, they're not as diverse as the students' needs are. And students and past supporting community members have reported breach of privacy that administrative leadership wanted to record or get documentation of what had been said, which is no, is a complete no-go in our community.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Chairman Gallegos, can I just make one clarifying point on my testimony?
Give me 1 second. Thank you, Representative Schrader. I'm going to yield myself 5 minutes as chairman to follow up on a couple of things that have come to light. So, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Schrader said he's not going to take it as an insult that you came here. But as chairman, I do take it as an insult. You came here and you lied to my face when you said that the reason why the superintendent could not be here is because they were in school. Now, you are trying to nuance this by saying, well, they're working and they have meetings, when in fact, you're just being deceitful. So we tried, I'm not done yet. We tried to have a very good conversation here, a conversation that should have been productive, and all I see right now is you basically throwing out these procedural maneuvers to basically cover your ass, and then you lied to me, a chairman of a committee, about why the superintendent was not here. Right? So why would I trust anything that you're saying from now on? Why would Representative Schrader trust you? Representative Bonamici trust you? You're going to do anything if you're willing to come to this chamber and lie. You purposely were deceitful. So don't give me any BS that you were trying to not be careful. Purposely deceitful. Now you may answer.
Sir, I apologize for that misunderstanding.
Don't apologize. Fix it. If I hear again from my two representatives from Oregon that there has been no changes, I'll haul everyone I can down. Lastly, did you or anyone in your department order the superintendent not to appear?
I did not do that. I can't speak for everyone throughout the department.
Okay. Second to last, want to make sure that we are very clear. We have some people here that have family that work for the school system. They, and we have heard this, they are fearful of retaliation. It is important that you, your department, make sure that there's no retaliation for these families that are testifying, or the employees of the families that are testifying. Is that correct?
What's the question?
That you will assure that there'll be no retaliation for the families.
Yes.
I apologize. Ms. Hirado, you may finish.
I just wanted to clarify to Representative Bonamici that students are permitted to wear regalia. It was staff that were told they couldn't because it was distracting, even though we're representing our individual tribes to graduation.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you, Ms. Hirado. We'll be moving on to closing statements. First, I want to thank the witnesses for the valuable testimony, the members for their questions. Thank you. It has been a long hearing. It's very disturbing to hear from our witnesses, and including the government witnesses, what is occurring in this school. When we take students into our schools, we take a very serious responsibility. We do not replace the parents, but we certainly are making decisions for them in place. And the fact that we are still putting up walls of communication between teachers and medical staff, walls of communication between mental health experts, and between parents and the administration, and to make matters worse, between students, parents, teachers, and their member of Congress is absolutely ridiculous. The reason why this school is having its problems is because it does have a culture of essentially stonewalling. And with stonewalling means no one's ever held accountable. And when no one's held accountable, then everything goes out the window. I hope this administration recognizes that there is a urgency, both bipartisan urgency, to actually fix this. We want our students, no matter who they are, where they're from, to succeed. And we want to give them the tools that they need to succeed. And partly and almost wholly is having an administration, school administration, that feels accountable. So I hope we take away from this that this is an opportunity for us to work together. I hope, Mr. Cruz, you have an opportunity to actually work with Representative Schrader on this. We want to have a good working relationship. It's in the best interest of our kids, and I hope to be proven wrong from what I've seen so far. Without objection, we don't have anybody from the minority to discuss, so I close this hearing. Thank you, all witnesses.